The distress signal had been playing for 6 hours straight. It echoed through every communication channel on Station Vareth. A repeating cry for help that no one wanted to answer. Council Representative Vareth stood in the central communication hub, his insectoid body clicking with irritation as he watched the blinking red light on the main screen. The signal came from the dying nebula, a region of space so dangerous that even the bravest pilots refused to enter it. Radiation storms, gravitational anomalies, and unstable energy pockets made it a death trap for any vessel foolish enough to fly through. The Villani research vessel Serenity of Stars, the automated message repeated. 200 souls aboard, including 47 children. Engine failure. Life support critical. Please respond. Please. Anyone. Vareth turned to the assembled representatives from a dozen alien species. The Kethrani delegation had already filed their official refusal. The Dromoth claimed it was outside their jurisdiction. The Torvani had calculated the survival odds at less than 12% and declared the mission mathematically unacceptable. It is decided then, Vareth announced, his voice carrying the weight of bureaucratic finality. The Serenity of Stars is classified as an acceptable loss. No rescue mission will be authorized. The representatives nodded in agreement. It was the logical choice. The safe choice. The only choice that made sense. In the corner of the hub, a human stood listening. Captain Jake Morrison was a man in his mid-40s with gray at his temples and calm brown eyes that had seen too much of the galaxy to be surprised by anything anymore. He commanded the cargo vessel called the Resolute, a sturdy ship that hauled supplies between stations. He and his crew had stopped at Vareth for fuel and provisions before continuing their route. They were not supposed to be involved in council business. Humans were barely tolerated in this part of space. The galaxy had learned about Earth's history, about the wars and the violence and the millions who died at human hands. To most alien species, humans were dangerous predators, killers who somehow managed to reach the stars despite their savage nature. Jake listened to the distress signal one more time. 200 people. 47 children. Stranded and dying because no one would come for them. He walked toward the main console where Vareth stood. "I will answer the signal," Jake said. The room fell silent. Every alien eye turned to stare at the human. Vareth's mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement or disbelief. "You? A human? You wish to enter the dying nebula?" "My ship can handle it," Jake replied. "My crew is willing." "Your crew?" Vareth leaned closer, studying Jake as one might study a dangerous animal. 12 humans on a cargo vessel. You understand the risks? The radiation alone would kill most species within hours. "Humans are sturdy," Jake said simply. A Tovani representative stepped forward, his gray skin rippling with agitation. "This is absurd. Why would humans involve themselves? What do you want from the Villani? What is your true purpose?" Jake met the alien's gaze without flinching. "Someone is asking for help. That is not an answer. It is the only answer that matters." The Tovani sputtered, unable to comprehend the response. The Kethrani whispered among themselves, their antennae twitching with confusion. The Dromoth simply stared, their dark eyes unreadable. Vareth raised one long arm for silence. "Captain Morrison, I must advise against this. Humans are not welcome in council space under the best circumstances. If you enter the dying nebula and fail, it will only confirm what the galaxy already believes about your species. You are reckless. You are violent. You do not think before you act." "Maybe," Jake admitted. "But we also do not ignore people who are dying when we have the power to help them." He turned and walked out of the communication hub before anyone could argue further. The Resolute was docked at Bay 17. Jake found his crew already assembled in the cargo hold, their faces serious but determined. His first officer, Lieutenant Amy Tran, had intercepted the distress signal hours ago and shared it with the others. They had been waiting for him, so we are doing this? Amy asked. She was young, late 20s, with sharp eyes and steady hands that could pilot through anything. We are doing this, Jake confirmed. Dr. Ben Carter, the ship's medic, nodded slowly. He was a quiet man with gentle hands and a calm voice that could soothe even the most frightened patient. I have been preparing the medical bay. If there are 200 people on that ship, many will need treatment. Chief Engineer Danny Russo cracked his knuckles. He was built like a cargo loader, thick arms and a broad chest, but his mind was sharp enough to keep the Resolute running through conditions that would destroy lesser ships. Engines are ready. I have reinforced the radiation shielding as much as I can. Communications Officer Lisa Park looked up from her console. I have been trying to reach the Volani ship. Their signal is weak, but they are still alive. For now, Security Officer Chris Lang stood at the back, arms crossed over his massive chest. He was the largest member of the crew, tall and muscular, with a face that looked like it had been carved from stone. But his eyes were kind, and Jake had seen him spend hours playing games with the children of merchants they transported. 17 species received that distress call, Jake told his crew. 17 species refused to answer. The Volani have been told that no one is coming for them, that they are going to die alone in the dark. He looked at each of them in turn. We are going to prove them wrong. No one argued. No one hesitated. They simply moved to their stations and prepared for launch. The Resolute departed Station Verith 20 minutes later. As the cargo vessel pulled away from the docking bay and turned toward the dying nebula, the aliens watching from the station windows could not understand what they were seeing. Vara stood at the observation deck, his compound eyes tracking the human ship until it disappeared into the darkness of space. Madness, he muttered. Complete madness. A Kithrani officer beside him chittered softly. They are killers, Representative. Perhaps they simply wish to die. No, Vara said slowly, something uncertain stirring in his voice. I do not think that is it at all. He watched the empty space where the Resolute had been, and for the first time in his long career, Council Representative Vorath found himself hoping that the humans would succeed. On board the Resolute, Jake Morrison sat in the captain's chair and stared at the swirling chaos of the dying nebula growing larger on the view screen. Somewhere in that storm of radiation and gravity, 200 people were waiting for someone to save them. All hands, he said quietly. Prepare for rough flying. We have people to bring home. Amy Tran pushed the engines to full power, and the Resolute plunged into the nebula. The dying nebula was worse than any of them had imagined. The moment the Resolute crossed the outer boundary, alarms began screaming throughout the ship. Radiation levels spiked so high that the sensors could barely keep up. The view screen showed nothing but swirling clouds of purple and red gas, punctuated by flashes of energy that struck like lightning. Amy Tran gripped the flight controls with both hands, her jaw tight with concentration. The ship bucked and shuddered as gravitational anomalies pulled at the hull from every direction. It was like flying through a hurricane while blindfolded. Radiation at 300% of safe levels, Lisa Park reported from her station. Our shielding is holding, but this is going to be rough. Danny Russo's voice crackled over the intercom from the engine room. I am rerouting power to the shields. We can handle this, but if we hit a major storm, I will need everyone to take their medication. Jake nodded and reached for the small case of anti-radiation pills that every human ship carried. The medication would not make them immune, but it would keep them alive long enough to complete the mission. Most alien species had no equivalent. Their bodies simply could not withstand this kind of punishment. How far did the Volani ship? Jake asked. Lisa checked her console. 4 hours at current speed. But Captain, there is something else. I have established contact with the Serenity of Stars. She put the transmission on speaker. A voice filled the bridge, high and musical, but heavy with exhaustion and fear. This is Counselor Mirth of the Volani research vessel Serenity of Stars. Please identify yourself. Are you truly coming for us? Jake leaned forward. Counselor Mirth, this is Captain Jake Morrison of the human cargo vessel the Resolute. We received your distress signal and we are on our way. What is your current status? There was a long pause. When Mirth spoke again, her voice trembled. Human? You are human? Yes, ma'am. Another pause, longer this time. Jake could hear other voices in the background, speaking rapidly in the Volani language. He caught fragments of what they were saying. The word killer appeared several times. Captain Morrison, Mirth finally said, I must be honest with you. My people are frightened. We have heard stories about your kind, your wars, your violence. Some of my passengers believe you are coming to harm us, not help us. Jake kept his voice calm and steady. Counselor, I understand your concerns. But right now, none of that matters. You have 200 people on a dying ship, and we are the only ones who answered your call. We are coming to get you out of there. Mirth was quiet for a moment. Our life support will fail in approximately 36 hours. Many of our passengers are injured from the initial engine failure. We have children aboard who are terrified. Can you truly reach us in time? We will reach you, Jake promised. Just hold on. He ended the transmission and turned to his crew. Their faces were grim but determined. You heard her, Jake said. We have 36 hours to get there, get him aboard, and get out of this nebula before everything falls apart. Let us make it happen. The hours that followed tested the Resolute and her crew in ways they had never experienced before. Amy navigated through gravitational eddies that threatened to tear the ship apart. She flew by instinct, reacting to dangers before the sensors could even detect them. Twice, she had to perform emergency maneuvers that pushed the ship's engines to their breaking point. Danny spent the entire time in the engine room, fighting to keep everything running. When a radiation spike damaged the secondary power coupling, he performed repairs while the ship was still moving through the storm. Any other engineer would have demanded they stop and find shelter first. Danny simply grabbed his tools and got to work. Lisa maintained constant communication with the Volani ship, providing updates and relaying their position. She learned that the Serenity of Stars had sent distress calls to 17 different species before the humans arrived. 17 civilizations had heard their cries for help. 17 civilizations had refused to come. We were their 18th attempt, Lisa told the bridge crew quietly. They did not even know humans would be at Station Vareth. We were just luck. Then let us make sure their luck holds, Jake replied, during a brief lull in the storms. When the Resolute found shelter behind a massive asteroid, the crew gathered in the small common area to rest and eat. They were exhausted, their bodies aching from the constant battering of the nebula. Dr. Ben Carter checked each of them for radiation damage. The medication was working, but they were still absorbing more than was healthy. It did not matter. They would deal with the consequences later. Chris Lang sat in the corner, cleaning his sidearm out of habit. He rarely spoke, but when he did, people listened. Captain, Chris said, why do you think the others refused to come? Jake considered the question. Fear, mostly. The nebula is dangerous. The odds of survival are low. Most species look at a situation like this and calculate whether the risk is worth the reward. And humans? Jake smiled slightly. Humans hear someone asking for help, and we go. It is not logical. It is not safe. But it is who we are. Amy looked up from her food. The aliens think we are monsters, killers. They see our history, and they see only the violence. They are not entirely wrong. Jake admitted. Humans have done terrible things to each other. We have fought wars that killed millions. We have committed acts of cruelty that shame our entire species. He paused. But that is not all we are. The same fire that makes us dangerous also makes us brave. The same instincts that drive us to fight also drive us to protect those who cannot protect themselves. Danny grunted in agreement. My grandfather used to say that humans are like wolves. Yes, they can kill, but they also guard their pack with their lives. The conversation faded into comfortable silence. They finished their meal, checked their equipment, and returned to their stations. The second half of the journey was even harder than the first. A massive radiation storm forced them to push through waves of energy that would have killed any other crew. The hull groaned under the pressure. Warning lights flashed across every console, but they kept flying. When the serenity of stars finally appeared on their sensors, battered and drifting in a pocket of relatively calm space, the crew of the Resolute felt a surge of hope. There they are, Lisa said, her voice thick with emotion. We made it. Jake studied the Vellani ship on the view screen. It was larger than he expected, an elegant vessel with flowing lines that spoke of a species who value beauty and grace. But it was wounded now, sections of the hull torn open, debris floating around it like blood in water. All hands, Jake announced. Prepare for docking. And everyone remember, these people are scared. They have been told their whole lives that humans are dangerous. We are going to show them something different. Amy guided the Resolute alongside the Vellani ship, matching their drift with careful precision. The docking clamps engaged with a solid thunk. Jake stood up from his chair and straightened his uniform. Let us go introduce ourselves, he said. The airlock hissed open, and Jake Morrison took his first step onto the Vellani ship. He moved slowly, keeping his hands visible at his sides. Behind him, Amy, Ben, and Chris followed in single file, their movements careful and unthreatening. They had discussed this moment during the journey. They knew how the Vellani would see them. The corridor beyond the airlock was dimly lit, emergency power casting everything in a faint blue glow. The air smelled stale and thin. Life support was failing faster than expected. A group of Vellani stood waiting for them. Jake had read about the Vellani, but seeing them in person was different. They were beautiful creatures, tall and slender, with bodies covered in iridescent feathers that shifted color with every movement. Their faces were bird-like, with large golden eyes and delicate beaks. They looked fragile, like they might break if you touched them too roughly, and they were terrified. The Vellani pressed against the walls as the humans entered, their feathers puffed up in fear. Some of them trembled visibly. A few made soft keening sounds that Jake recognized as distress calls. At the front of the group stood a female, Vellani wearing a simple silver robe. Her feathers were deep blue and purple, and despite the fear in her eyes, she held herself with dignity. This had to be Counselor Mirith. Captain Morrison, she said, her voice steady despite everything. You actually came. I told you we would, Jake replied gently. Mirith studied him with those large golden eyes. Forgive my people. They have heard stories. We all have. She paused. You must understand, in all the records we have of humanity, the common thread is violence. Your wars, your weapons, your capacity for destruction. My people see you and they see predators. Jake did not argue or defend. He simply nodded. I understand, and I will not pretend those stories are lies. Humans have done terrible things. He gestured to his crew. But we are not here to hurt you. We are here to help. Mirith looked past him at the other humans. Her gaze lingered on Chris Lang, the largest of the group. Chris stood nearly 2 meters tall, with broad shoulders and hands that looked like they could crush stone. He was exactly what the Vellani probably imagined when they thought of human killers. Chris met her gaze and gave a small nod, then carefully lowered himself to one knee so he would appear less imposing. Something flickered in Mirith's eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or the beginning of doubt about everything she had been taught. "How many injured do you have?" Dr. Ben Carter asked, stepping forward with his medical kit. Mirith hesitated only a moment before answering. 37 with serious injuries. Another 50 with minor wounds. The initial engine failure caused significant damage to our passenger compartments. Ben nodded professionally. "Show me to them. I will begin treatment immediately. You would help our wounded?" Mirith asked. "Without conditions? Without payment?" "That is why I am here," Ben said simply. Mirith assigned a young Villani to guide Ben to the medical bay. As the doctor walked away, the crowd of Villani parted for him like water around a stone, keeping their distance but watching his every move. Jake turned to Amy. "Work with their engineering team. See what can be done to stabilize their systems." Amy nodded and headed off with another Villani guide. That left Jake and Chris in the main corridor with Mirith and approximately 40 Villani passengers who still looked ready to flee at any sudden movement. "Counselor," Jake said, "we need to assess your entire ship and prepare for evacuation. My vessel is small, but we can fit everyone if we pack tight. How much time do we have?" "Life support will fail completely in 30 hours, Mirith replied. "But there is another problem. The dying nebula is becoming more unstable. Our sensors detected an energy wave forming several light minutes from here. If it reaches us before we escape, both ships will be destroyed." Jake absorbed this news without showing the fear that gripped his chest. Then we work fast. The next several hours were a blur of activity. Jake moved through the Villani ship, coordinating efforts, assessing damage, and speaking with passengers who were too frightened to approach him on their own. He kept his voice soft and his movements slow, letting them see that he meant no harm. Chris Lang found the children. They were huddled in a storage compartment near the rear of the ship. Approximately 40 young Villani, ranging from toddlers to adolescents. A few adult caretakers tried to keep them calm, but the children's fear was obvious in their wide eyes and trembling feathers. When Chris entered the room, the caretakers immediately moved to shield the children with their bodies. Chris stopped at the doorway. He was too big to appear non-threatening just by standing still, so he did something else. He sat down on the floor, folding his massive frame until he was at eye level with the smallest children. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small flashlight. "Hey there," he said softly, his deep voice gentle. "Want to see something cool?" He clicked on the flashlight and positioned his hands in front of it. On the wall behind him, a shadow appeared. A bird made from his fingers, its wings flapping slowly. The children stared in confusion. The caretakers exchanged uncertain glances. Chris made another shape. A dog, then a rabbit, then something that might have been a spaceship if you squinted. A tiny Villani girl, no more than 4 or 5 years old, took a hesitant step forward. Her feathers were pale pink, and her golden eyes were huge in her small face. "How do you do that?" she asked. "Magic," Chris replied with a slight smile. "Want me to teach you?" The girl looked back at her caretakers, then at Chris, slowly, carefully. She walked over and sat down beside him. "My name is Kira," she said. "I am Chris. Nice to meet you." Kira. Within minutes, Chris had a small crowd of Villani children gathered around him, their fear forgotten as they tried to make their own shadow shapes with their delicate hands. Their laughter echoed through the storage compartment, a sound that had not been heard on the Serenity of Stars since the accident. Mirith found them like that an hour later. She stood in the doorway, watching the massive human killer sitting on the floor surrounded by giggling children, patiently adjusting their tiny fingers to make better shadow puppets. I do not understand, she said quietly. Jake appeared beside her. Understand what? Your people. Mirith's voice was thick with confusion. You fight wars that kill millions. You eat the flesh of other creatures. You have weapons that could destroy worlds. And yet this man sits with our children and makes shadow animals to calm their fears. Humans are complicated, Jake admitted. We contain contradictions. We can be cruel and kind, violent and gentle, selfish and selfless. Sometimes all in the same person. Mirith watched Chris help Kira make a shadow that looked almost like a Vellani. Then how do you decide which to be? Jake considered the question carefully. We choose. Every day, in every moment, we choose who we want to be. And right now, my crew and I are choosing to help. A young Vellani ran up to Mirith, speaking rapidly. Mirith's expression changed, her feathers darkening with concern. What is it? Jake asked. The energy wave, Mirith said. It has accelerated. We have less than 6 hours before it reaches us. Jake felt his stomach drop. 6 hours. To evacuate over 200 people. Through a single airlock connection. Then we need to move faster, he said. Get everyone ready. We are leaving now. The evacuation began in chaos. 203 Vellani needed to move from their dying ship to the Resolute through a single airlock connection barely wide enough for 2 people to pass at once. They had 6 hours. It was not enough time. Jake stood at the airlock junction, directing traffic with calm authority while his mind raced through calculations. At current speed, they would get perhaps 150 people across before the energy wave hit. That meant 50 would be left behind to die. Unacceptable. Move faster, he ordered. Help anyone who needs it. Carry the children if you have to. The Vellani were trying, but they were not built for speed. Their delicate bodies and careful movements were suited for peaceful research stations, not desperate evacuations. Many of the passengers were elderly or injured, slowing the line even further. Amy's voice crackled over the communicator. Captain, I have been working with their engineering team. The Vellani ship's reactor is still functional. If we overload it at the right moment, the explosion could create a shock wave that would push us clear of the energy wave. How do we trigger the overload? That is the problem. Someone would have to stay behind and do it manually. Their systems are too damaged for remote activation. Jake closed his eyes for a moment. Understood. Keep working on alternatives. The hours blurred together in a haze of exhaustion and desperate urgency. Dr. Ben Carter performed surgery in the corridor when a Vellani elder collapsed during the transfer. The elderly female had internal bleeding from an injury sustained during the original accident, and she would not survive being moved without treatment. So Ben operated right there on the floor of a dying ship. While people stepped around him on their way to safety, Lisa Park gave her oxygen mask to a young Vellani mother who was struggling to breathe when life support flickered. Lisa's face went pale from oxygen deprivation, but she kept working, kept helping, kept pushing forward. Chris Lang carried Vellani children 3 at a time, one on his back and one under each arm. The little ones clung to him with their tiny clawed hands. And he ran through the corridors like they weighed nothing, delivering them to safety and returning for more. With 3 hours remaining, 140 Vellani had been transferred. 63 still waited. With 2 hours remaining, 180 had made it across. 23 more to go, mostly the severely injured who had to be moved on stretchers. With 1 hour remaining. All 203 Vellani passengers were aboard the Resolute, but Danny Russo was not. The chief engineer had stayed behind on the Vellani ship, working to prepare the reactor overload. He had finally found a way to rig a manual trigger. But it required someone to be physically present in the engine room until the last possible moment. Danny, get back here now. Jake ordered through the communicator. Not yet, Captain. The timing has to be perfect. Too early, and the shock wave will not be strong enough. Too late, and I will be caught in the blast. That is not a risk I am willing to take with your life. Danny's laugh came through the speaker, tired but determined. Good thing it is my life to risk, then. I will make it, Captain. Trust me. Jake turned to look at the Resolute's common area. It was packed with Villani, hundreds of them crammed into a space meant for 20 humans. They sat on the floor, leaned against walls, held their children close. The ship's life support was struggling to keep up with the added strain. Mira stood near the airlock, watching Jake with those large golden eyes. She had refused to leave until every one of her people was safe first. Now she was the last Villani on the dying ship. Counselor, Jake said, you need to board my ship now. What about your engineer? He will follow. Mirith did not move. You would stay here? Wait for him? Risk being caught in the explosion? He is my crew, you humans. Mirith shook her head slowly, her feathers rustling with an emotion Jake could not identify. 17 species received our distress call. 17 species calculated the odds and decided we were not worth saving. Then you came. You flew through a nebula that would kill anyone else. You carried our wounded in your arms. Your people gave their own air so ours could breathe. And now you stand here, willing to die, because one of your crew is still aboard. She took a step toward him, close enough that Jake could see the individual barbules on her feathers. We called you killers, she said softly. We were wrong. Counselor, please. Get on my ship. Mirith held his gaze for a long moment, then nodded and crossed through the airlock. Jake watched her go, then turned back to the Villani ship's corridor. Danny, status report. Almost ready. The reactor is charging. I need another 3 minutes. You have 2. That energy wave is not waiting. Jake looked at the sensor readout on his communicator. The energy wave was a massive wall of destructive force, sweeping through the nebula like a tsunami. When it hit, anything in its path would be torn apart at the molecular level. 90 seconds, Danny. Working on it. The seconds crawled by. Jake refused to close the airlock, refused to leave his engineer behind. Amy's voice came through the communicator, urging him to seal the connection and give them time to build distance. He ignored her. 60 seconds. Got it. Danny's shout was triumphant. Remote trigger is active. I can detonate from here, then run. Danny ran. Jake watched the corridor, his heart pounding as the sound of heavy footsteps echoed through the Villani ship. The energy wave was visible now on the external sensors. A shimmering curtain of destruction racing toward them. Danny Russo burst through the airlock. Breathing hard, his face red with exertion, Jake slammed the airlock controls. The doors sealed with a hiss. Amy, get us out of here. Danny, blow that reactor. The Resolute's engines roared to life, pushing them away from the Villani ship. At the same moment, Danny triggered the overload. The serenity of stars erupted in a brilliant flash of light. The explosion tore the elegant vessel apart, sending a shock wave rippling through space. It caught the Resolute like a leaf in a hurricane, sending the ship tumbling end over end. Villani passengers screamed as they were thrown across the common area. The human crew held on to whatever they could reach. Jake felt himself slam against a wall, pain shooting through his shoulder. Then the shockwave passed, and they were still alive. The energy wave arrived moments later, but they were already clear. It swept through the space where both ships had been, destroying the debris of the serenity of stars, and continued on into the nebula. Jake pulled himself up from the floor, wincing at the pain in his shoulder. Report, is everyone alive? Amy's voice came through, shaken but steady. We are clear. Engines took damage, but we can make it back to Station Vareth. Jake let out a breath he did not know he had been holding. He turned to look at the common area, where over 200 Villani were slowly picking themselves up off the floor. Mirith stood among them, her feathers disheveled, but her eyes bright with wonder. "We are alive," she said, as if she could not quite believe it. "Yes," Jake replied. "We are alive." In the corner of the room, Chris Lang sat with his back against the wall. Little Kira was curled up in his lap, her small hands clutching his shirt. She had fallen asleep during the chaos, trusting the human killer to keep her safe. Chris looked down at her with an expression Jake had never seen on his security officer's face before. It looked a lot like love. The Resolute limped back to Station Vareth with her hull scarred by radiation and her engines barely functioning. But she flew, and that was all that mattered. Jake Morrison stood on the bridge, watching the massive station grow larger on the view screen. His shoulder still ached from the impact during their escape, and exhaustion pulled at every muscle in his body. He had not slept in over 30 hours. None of his crew had. "Captain," Lisa Park said from her station, "Station Vareth is hailing us. They are demanding an explanation for our unauthorized entry into Council space. Tell them we are coming in whether they like it or not. We have 200 refugees who need food, medical attention, and a safe place to rest." Lisa smiled slightly and relayed the message. The docking procedure took longer than usual because of the damage to the Resolute systems, but eventually the cargo vessel settled into Bay 17 with a final groan of stressed metal. The moment the airlock opened, Jake saw that a crowd had gathered. Council Representative Vareth stood at the front, his insectoid body stiff with authority. Behind him were representatives from at least a dozen species, along with station security officers and medical teams. The Kethrani were there, their antennae twitching with agitation. The Tovani stood in the back, their gray faces unreadable. Even the Dramath had come to watch. Jake stepped off his ship first, followed by his crew. "Captain Morrison," Morith began, his voice sharp, "you entered Council space without authorization. You conducted a rescue operation that was specifically classified as unviable. You risked a diplomatic incident between the human territories and the Galactic Council. What do you have to say for yourself?" Before Jake could respond, Councilor Mirith walked down the ramp. She moved past Jake without a word and stopped directly in front of Vareth. For a long moment, the Villani leader simply stared at the council representative. Then she spoke. 17 species received our distress call, Mirith said, her voice clear and strong enough to carry across the entire docking bay. 17 species calculated the risks, weighed the odds, and decided that my people were not worth saving. You told us that our deaths were an acceptable loss. Vareth shifted uncomfortably. Counselor, the conditions in the dying nebula were extremely dangerous. The probability of a successful rescue was less than 12%. Any reasonable assessment would conclude that the mission was not viable. And yet here I am. Mirith gestured behind her, where Villani passengers were beginning to emerge from the Resolute. Here we all are. 203 souls who were supposed to die in the dark, abandoned by the civilizations that call themselves enlightened. The aliens in the crowd shifted and murmured among themselves. You call humans killers, Mirith continued. You warn your children about their violence. You keep them at the edges of your territories and treat them like dangerous animals. I believed all of it. I was terrified when I learned that humans had answered our call. She turned and looked at Jake and his crew. But I watched these killers fly through radiation that would have killed any of you within hours. I watched them carry our wounded in their arms and perform surgery in hallways to save lives. I watched a human woman give her own oxygen to one of my people without hesitation. Her voice wavered slightly. I watched a human man sit on the floor with our frightened children and make shadow puppets to calm their fears. Kira had emerged from the ship, still holding Chris Lang's hand. She stood beside the massive human, her tiny feathered body barely reaching his waist. "You call them killers," Mira said again. "But when our people were dying, when we begged the galaxy for help, only the killers answered." She turned back to Varth, her golden eyes blazing. "Where were you?" The council representative had no response. His mandibles clicked uselessly as he searched for words that would not come. Vellani elder stepped forward from the group of refugees. Her feathers were gray with age, and bandages covered one arm where Dr. Ben Carter had operated to save her life. "The human doctor worked on me for an hour in a corridor while the ship was falling apart," she said. "He never stopped. He never complained. He never asked for anything in return." Another Vellani spoke up. "The human pilot flew through conditions that should have destroyed their ship. She never hesitated. The humans gave us their food," someone else called out. "Their water. Their medicine. They went hungry so our children could eat." More voices joined in, a chorus of testimony from 200 people who had seen something impossible. Kira tugged on Chris's hand until he knelt down beside her. Then she turned to face the crowd. "Chris is my friend," she announced in her small voice. "He taught me how to make shadow birds. He carried me when I was scared. He is not a killer. He is nice." Chris's stone face cracked into a genuine smile. He placed one massive hand gently on Kira's head. The crowd fell silent. Jake stepped forward. He did not look at Varth or any of the other council representatives. Instead, he addressed the station at large. "My crew and I did not come here for recognition. We did not ask for payment or favors. We answered a distress call because that is what humans do. When someone cries for help, we respond. It is that simple." He straightened his injured shoulder, ignoring the pain. "We will continue running our cargo routes. We will keep our heads down and follow your rules as best we can. But I want to make one thing clear to everyone here today." His voice hardened. "If anyone else sends out an SOS, we will answer. It does not matter what species they are. It does not matter what the odds are. It does not matter if the council tells us not to." He looked directly at Varth. "We will come." The crowd was completely still. Then something unexpected. HAPENEDA Torvani representative stepped forward from the crowd. He approached Jake slowly, his gray face difficult to read. "Captain Morrison," he said, "on behalf of my people, I apologize. We calculated that your mission would fail. We were wrong. And more than that, we were wrong to let calculations override compassion." He extended one long-fingered hand in what Jake recognized as the Torvani gesture of respect. Jake accepted it without hesitation. One by one, other representatives came forward. The Kethrani, the Dromoth, species Jake did not even recognize. They offered thanks, apologies, and gestures of friendship. Varth watched it all with compound eyes that revealed nothing. But when the crowd finally began to disperse, he approached Jake privately. "You have changed things today, Captain," the council representative said quietly. "Perhaps more than you know." "I did not do it for politics," Jake replied. "I know. That is precisely why it matters." Hours later, the Resolute was cleared for departure. The ship had been repaired enough to limp back to human space, where she would receive proper attention. Mirith came to see them off. She stood at the edge of the docking bay, watching as the human crew prepared to leave. "Will I see you again?" she asked Jake. "Maybe. The galaxy is large, but our paths might cross." Mirith nodded slowly. "When I return to my people, I will tell them what happened here. I will tell them about the humans who saved us. About the killers who turned out to be protectors. Just tell them the truth," Jake said. "That is enough." He boarded his ship. Amy was already at the helm. Danny was in the engine room singing off-key as he worked. And Chris was making one last shadow puppet through the window for Kira, who stood beside Mirith waving goodbye. The Resolute pulled away from Station Vareth and turned toward human space. On the observation deck, Mirith watched until the ship disappeared among the stars. Then she turned and found Vareth standing beside her. "They are not killers," she said softly. "They are something else entirely. And the galaxy has misjudged them for far too long." Vareth was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded. "Perhaps," he admitted. "Perhaps we have." Across Station Vareth, in corridors and common rooms, the story of the Resolute was already spreading. The killers who had answered a call that everyone else ignored. The humans who had risked everything for strangers. The galaxy was beginning to listen. And somewhere in the darkness of space, Captain Jake Morrison sat in his chair on the bridge of his battered cargo ship, watching the stars drift by. "All hands," he said quietly. "Let us go find someone else to help." Amy smiled and set course for home.